A financial tsunami that bankrupted 5,000 businesses. A southern regime that believed itself invincible, betting everything on a rebellion. A brutal civil war that claimed 620,000 lives. Who could have imagined that these three historical upheavals that reshaped America all stemmed from the same overlooked culprit? A Category 2 hurricane in the Atlantic that swallowed 30,000 pounds of gold and ultimately single-handedly brewed the American Civil War. September 3rd, 1857. The side-wheel steamship SS Central America departed Havana, Cuba, bound for New York. This was not merely a passenger ship. It was a floating vault. On board were 578 passengers and crew, along with a cargo vital to the nation's fate. 30,000 pounds of gold. This was wealth dug from the California gold rush. According to the cargo manifest at the time, this gold was valued at approximately $1.6 million, worth hundreds of millions in today's purchasing power. More importantly, this gold had a specific tactical purpose. It was life-saving money being rushed to New York. The American banking sector at the time was teetering on the edge of a liquidity crisis. The Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company had just declared bankruptcy, and New York banks desperately needed this hard currency to reassure depositors and prevent a run on the banks. The commander of the ship knew perfectly well that he was steering not just a ship, but a shot of adrenaline for Wall Street. September 9th, the ship encountered a Category 2 hurricane that had long been lying in ambush near Cape Hatteras. This was not merely bad weather. It was a cruel die cast by nature, opening its massive maw to swallow the national destiny that originally belonged to the North. If it were today, weather satellites would have issued early warnings, but in 1857, they were defenseless. Captain William Herndon was a Navy veteran with years of service. In the face of 105-mile-per-hour winds, he displayed extreme professionalism. Data records show the storm raged for 4 full days. The ship took on massive amounts of water. The boilers were extinguished and the steam pumps failed. Herndon organized passengers into long lines, bailing water by hand with buckets for 30 hours straight. On September 12th, unable to control the flooding, Herndon made his final decision. He successfully transferred the women and children to a passing brig, the Marine Bird. Then, he chose to remain on board. At 8 p.m. that night, the SS Central America, carrying 425 men and 30,000 pounds of gold, sank to the bottom of the Atlantic. Captain Herndon stood atop the wheelhouse, going down with his ship. When the news reached New York via telegraph, a storm more violent than the hurricane erupted on Wall Street. New York banks had counted on this gold to ease the credit crunch, but now the last hope was extinguished. Panic ignited instantly. On October 13th, 1857, New York banks announced the suspension of specie coin payments. Within the next 2 months, the financial crisis known as the Panic of 1857 swept across the nation. Data reveals the scale of this disaster. Within a year, 5,000 businesses in the American North declared bankruptcy. Railroad stocks plummeted. Shares of the Illinois Central Railroad evaporated by 60% in a matter of weeks. Tens of thousands of northern workers lost their jobs, and New York City even had to deploy militia to suppress street riots caused by hunger. This crisis even touched a future president. In Springfield, Illinois, lawyer Abraham Lincoln fell into deep anxiety. His primary client, the Illinois Central Railroad, stopped paying legal fees due to bankruptcy. Lincoln wrote in a letter to a friend that he was penniless at the moment, unable to even cover daily household expenses. If even the future commander-in-chief was plunged into poverty, one could imagine what ordinary northern families endured. The northern industrial economic system appeared incredibly fragile in this crisis, exacerbated by the absence of gold. However, south of the Mason-Dixon line, the situation was entirely different. This is the deadliest link in the butterfly effect. While northern factories closed, workers rioted, and Lincoln worried about money, the southern plantation economy remained unscathed. In 1857, European demand for cotton remained strong. Data shows that cotton exports hit a record high that year. This confidence was not baseless. It was supported by concrete international data. The textile industry of the world hegemon, the British Empire, had its lifeline completely in the hands of the South. Up to 80% of the cotton imported by Britain came from the American South. The port of Liverpool ran almost entirely on southern cotton bales. Southern planters watched the North descend into chaos, while their own bank accounts continued to swell. This generated a fatal logical deduction. South Carolina Senator James Henry Hammond summarized this in March 1858, delivering a famous speech in the Senate. "No, you dare not to make war on cotton. No power on the earth dares to make war upon it. Cotton is king." This asymmetric economic crisis injected the South with a false confidence. They became convinced that northern industrial capitalism was fragile and unstable, while the southern slave-based agricultural economy was superior and invincible. More importantly, they believed that if they seceded, Britain would inevitably intervene in the war to support the South to preserve that 80% cotton supply. This sense of economic superiority translated directly into political radicalism. If there was hesitation in the South about secession before 1857, that hesitation vanished after the Great Panic triggered by that fatal storm. Data supports this shift. In the election of 1860, hostility toward Lincoln in southern states reached its zenith. They no longer viewed this as a gamble with equal odds, but as a war they were destined to win. They misjudged the North's industrial potential. Those factories that looked dilapidated in 1857 actually possessed immense war mobilization capabilities. They merely lacked liquidity temporarily. But in this critical window of time, the South saw only the surface. In 1861, based on this economic confidence of cotton is king, the Confederacy was formed and fired upon Fort Sumter. It all began with an airflow over the Atlantic. Because of a hurricane, the SS Central America sank. Because the ship sank, 30,000 pounds of gold failed to reach New York. Because the gold was absent, the Panic of 1857 destroyed Northern industrial confidence and even plunged Lincoln into poverty. Because the North went into recession while the South prospered, the South developed a strategic delusion that cotton is king, mistakenly believing Britain would fight for cotton. This delusion ultimately gave the South the nerve to launch the American Civil War. If that hurricane had not struck, if those 30,000 pounds of gold had been injected into New York banks on time, perhaps the Panic of 1857 would have been contained in its infancy, and the resilience shown by the Northern economy would have made the South think twice in 1860. The bloodiest page in American history might have been written in a completely different way. But history has no ifs. That hurricane did not just swallow a ship. It ultimately whipped up a bloody storm that lasted for years, forever changing America.